The blood on her hands had long dried by the time Sarah Mae Thornton stumbled through the doors of the abandoned barn, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore through her chest like fire. She pressed one palm against the swell of her belly, 7 months heavy with child, and tried to steady herself against the rough wooden beam that held up the hayloft above. The September heat of 1883, Texas still clung to the air even as dusk settled over the prairie, and sweat plastered her dark hair to her forehead in tangled strands. She had been running for 3 days straight, stealing rides on freight wagons when she could, walking when she could not, always looking over her shoulder for the men she knew would come. The barn smelled of old hay and dust, and the particular emptiness that comes from long disuse. Sarah sank down into a corner where the shadows were thickest, pulling her worn calico dress around her legs and trying to make herself as small as possible. Her boots were falling apart at the soles, and her feet were a mass of blisters that wept and bled with every step. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was staying hidden, staying alive, keeping this baby safe until she could figure out what to do next. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about Thomas lying in that pool of blood on the kitchen floor, tried not to remember the way his brother Garrett had looked at her with those cold, dead eyes, and said she would hang for what she had done. Self-defense meant nothing when you were a woman, and the man you had killed came from the most powerful family in 3 counties. The Thorntons owned half of Hartwell and most of the surrounding ranch land, and they did not take kindly to anyone who stood against them, much less a woman who had put a bullet through Thomas Thornton's black heart when he came at her in a drunken rage. She had not meant to marry him. That was the hell of it. Thomas had been charming at first, back when she was 18 and working in her father's general store in town, back when his smile had seemed genuine and his promises had sounded like the future she wanted. But her father had died 6 months after the wedding, and Thomas had sold the store without asking her, pocketing the money and drinking most of it away while his temper grew shorter and his fists grew quicker. When she found out she was carrying his child, she thought maybe it would change things, make him softer somehow. Instead, it had made everything worse. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself and let the tears come, silent and hot against her cheeks. She was so tired she could barely think straight, and hunger gnawed at her belly like a living thing. She had not eaten since yesterday morning when a kind woman at a way station had given her half a sandwich and not asked any questions. The baby moved inside her, a flutter of tiny limbs that reminded her she could not afford to give up, could not afford to let despair take hold. She must have dozed off despite herself, because the next thing she knew the barn doors were creaking open and lamplight was spilling across the floor in a golden pool. Sarah jerked awake, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She pressed herself further back into the corner, hardly daring to breathe, praying whoever it was would not see her in the shadows. Footsteps crunched across the dirt floor, slow and deliberate. A man's voice, low and rough with the particular drawl of someone who had spent his whole life under the Texas sun, called out into the darkness. "I know someone is in here," saw the tracks leading up from the road. "Now I have got a lantern and a rifle, but I would much prefer not to use the latter if I can help it." Sarah stayed frozen, her mind racing through options. She could try to run, but she was exhausted and pregnant and would not make it 10 feet before he caught her. She could stay silent and hope he would give up and leave, but something in his voice told her he was not the giving up type. Or she could speak up and take her chances that he was not one of Garrett Thornton's men come to drag her back to Hartwell to hang. The lamplight swung closer, illuminating the old horse stalls and the broken wagon wheel leaning against the far wall. Sarah saw the shadow of the man before she saw him properly, tall and broad-shouldered with a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, someone who had faced down danger before and lived to tell about it. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was gentler now, less threatening. I can see you there in the corner. I am not going to hurt you. This is my barn, my land, and I just want to know who is taking shelter here and why. Sarah swallowed hard and made her decision. She could not run anymore. She did not have it in her. Please, she whispered, and her voice came out cracked and desperate. Please do not send me away. I will leave at first light, I promise. I just need somewhere safe to sleep for one night. The man moved closer, and the lamplight finally fell across his face. He was younger than his voice suggested, probably no more than 25 or 26, with sharp features weathered by sun and wind and eyes the color of storm clouds. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dark hair curled out from under his hat. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability and strength. His eyes widened when he got a good look at her, taking in her condition, her torn dress, the desperate exhaustion written across every line of her face. Jesus, he breathed, and he set the rifle down immediately, propping it against the wall before he crouched down to her level, careful to keep some distance so as not to spook her. Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need a doctor? Sarah shook her head quickly, tears threatening again. No doctor. Please, I just need to rest. I will be gone by morning, I swear it. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes sharp and assessing. Then he straightened up and held out one calloused hand to her. Can you stand? She hesitated, then nodded and took his hand, letting him help her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her and she swayed dangerously. He caught her elbow to steady her, his grip firm but careful. When did you last eat? He asked. Yesterday, she admitted. Maybe the day before. I cannot quite remember. He made a sound low in his throat that might have been anger or sympathy or both. You are coming up to the house, he said, and it was not a request. You are going to eat a proper meal and sleep in a proper bed, and then in the morning we will figure out what in the hell is going on. I cannot, Sarah protested, even as her stomach growled at the mention of food. You do not understand. There are men looking for me. If they find me here, they will hurt you too. The cowboy picked up his rifle and the lantern and gestured toward the barn doors. Ma'am, I have dealt with plenty of trouble in my time. A few men do not scare me. Now come on before you fall over. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to protect this stranger from the storm that was surely coming. But she was so tired and so hungry, and the thought of a real meal and a real bed was too tempting to resist. She let him guide her out of the barn and across the dusty yard toward a modest ranch house that sat silhouetted against the darkening sky. The inside of the house was simple but clean, with rough-hewn furniture and a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. The cowboy led her to a chair at the kitchen table and lit a few more lamps, filling the space with warm light. Sarah sank into the chair gratefully and watched as he moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, stoking the fire in the cook stove and pulling out bread and cold chicken and a jar of pickled vegetables. Name is James Holloway, he said as he worked, not looking at her. This here is the Broken Creek Ranch, about 20 miles east of a town called Redemption. Been in my family since my father homesteaded it back in '68. He passed 2 years ago, left it to me and my sister, but she married a man from Kansas and moved north. So now it is just me and a couple of hired hands who help with the cattle. He set a plate in front of her loaded with food, and Sarah had to force herself not to fall on it like a starving animal. She picked up a piece of bread with shaking hands and took a bite, closing her eyes as the taste flooded her mouth. It was just bread, nothing special, but it was the best thing she had ever eaten. James poured her a glass of milk and sat down across from her, watching her eat with an expression she could not quite read. You want to tell me your name? He asked quietly. She swallowed and met his eyes, trying to decide how much truth to give him. Sarah, she said finally. Sarah Mae. And the men looking for you, Sarah Mae. What did you do to get them on your trail? The chicken turned to ash in her mouth. She set down the piece she had been holding and stared at her plate, unable to look at him. I killed my husband, she said flatly. He was drunk and he came at me with a belt and I shot him. His family has money and power and they want me to hang for it, so I ran." She expected horror, expected judgment, expected him to throw her out or worse, send word to the nearest marshal. Instead, James was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was thoughtful. "Was he the father?" He nodded toward her belly. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Did you have a good reason to shoot him?" She looked up at him then, searching his face for any sign of condemnation. "He beat me," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "He beat me all the time over nothing, over everything. That night he said he was going to beat the baby out of me, said he did not want a bastard child. I grabbed my father's old pistol from the drawer and I shot him. I did not mean to kill him, I just wanted him to stop." James nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed something he already suspected. "Then you did what you had to do," he said simply. "And any man who would lay hands on a woman, especially one carrying his child, got what was coming to him." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense it made her dizzy. She had expected condemnation from everyone, had prepared herself to be judged and found wanting. To have this stranger, this cowboy she had known for all of 20 minutes, simply accept her word and her actions without question was almost too much to bear. "But his family," she said desperately, "the Thorntons. They own half of Hartwell and they have got the sheriff in their pocket. His brother Garrett swore he would see me hang. They have probably got wanted posters up by now, might even have hired bounty hunters. If they find me here, if they find you helped me, they will come after you too." James stood and started clearing away the dishes, his movements calm and unhurried. "Then they will have to get through me first," he said. "And I am not an easy man to get through. You are safe here, Sarah Mae. This is your home now for as long as you need it to be." Sarah stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You do not even know me," she protested. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" He turned to look at her, and there was something fierce and protective in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said quietly. "Because you are in trouble through no fault of your own, and because I will be damned if I stand by and let injustice happen on my watch. My father taught me that a man is measured by what he does when no one is looking, by how he treats those who cannot help themselves. You need help and I am in a position to give it, simple as that." It was not simple at all, but Sarah was too overwhelmed to argue. She nodded mutely and James came around the table to help her to her feet. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you where you can sleep. You look like you are about to fall over." He led her down a short hallway to a small bedroom that clearly had not been used in some time. The bed was made up with clean sheets and a thick quilt, and there was a washstand in the corner with a pitcher and basin. James lit the lamp on the bedside table and turned back to her. "This was my sister's room before she married. You are welcome to it. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and I will see if I can find some of her old clothes that might fit you. Your dress is pretty torn up." Sarah looked down at herself and realized for the first time just how bedraggled she must appear, covered in dust and sweat and the stains of 3 days on the run. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words seemed completely inadequate for everything he was doing. "Thank you so much." James nodded and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. "One more thing," he said. "If those men do come looking, you let me handle it. You stay in the house and you keep out of sight. Understood?" Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could not ask him to put himself in danger for her. But the exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that she had food in her belly and safety around her. She nodded, and James gave her a small smile before he left, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, hardly able to believe this turn of fate. Then she moved to the washstand and poured water into the basin, stripping off her ruined dress and washing away as much of the grime as she could. She found a nightgown folded in the trunk at the foot of the bed, soft white cotton that smelled faintly of lavender, and pulled it on before climbing under the quilt. The bed was softer than anything she had slept on in months, and the relief of being horizontal, of being safe, was almost overwhelming. She placed both hands on her belly and felt the baby move beneath her palms. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "We are going to be all right now." And for the first time in 3 days, she let herself believe it might be true. Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the barn, James Holloway, the impossible kindness of a stranger. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the hard travel of the past days, and looked around the small bedroom in the morning light. Someone had left a stack of clothing on the chair by the door, and Sarah got up to investigate. There were 2 simple dresses, both faded but clean and well-mended, a shawl, a pair of stockings, and even a pair of worn but serviceable boots that looked like they might actually fit. She dressed quickly, choosing the blue calico dress that seemed like it would be most forgiving of her expanding belly, and braided her hair back from her face. She looked almost respectable, almost like a normal woman instead of a fugitive on the run. The smell of coffee and bacon led her down the hallway to the kitchen, where James was standing at the stove cooking breakfast. He looked up when she entered and gave her a nod of greeting. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted, settling herself at the table. She watched him cook, noting the easy competence with which he handled the pan, flipping bacon and stirring eggs with the air of someone who had been taking care of himself for a long time. "You did not have to do all this," she said quietly. "I can earn my keep. I am a good cook and I know my way around a house." James glanced at her over his shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "You are 7 months pregnant and you just ran for 3 days straight. I think you have earned a few days of rest before you start worrying about earning your keep." He brought 2 plates to the table and sat down across from her. "Besides, I am not keeping score. You are a guest, not hired help." Sarah picked up her fork but did not start eating right away. "James," she said, testing out his name on her tongue, "I need you to understand something. The Thorntons will not give up, Garrett especially. He was always the worse of the 2 brothers, meaner, more ruthless. Thomas at least had moments when he could be almost human. Garrett does not. He will come looking for me, and when he does, he will not come alone." James ate a few bites of bacon before responding, his expression thoughtful. "How many men does he have at his disposal?" "I do not know exactly. Maybe 10 or 12 ranch hands who are loyal to him. Plus he has the sheriff in his pocket and probably a few bounty hunters if he is offering enough money." Sarah's hands tightened around her fork. "You should let me go. I can keep moving, maybe make it to New Mexico or California, somewhere far enough away that they will not bother to follow. In your condition, you would be lucky to make it 50 miles before something went wrong." James shook his head firmly. "No, you are staying here where I can keep an eye on you and make sure you and that baby stay healthy. As for the Thorntons, we will deal with them if and when they show up." "You keep saying we," Sarah said quietly, "but this is not your fight." James looked at her, and there was something in his gray eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "You became my fight the moment you stumbled into my barn," he said. "I do not abandon people who need help, Sarah Mae. It is not in my nature." They ate in silence for a while, and Sarah found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. In the morning light, she could see more details she had missed the night before: the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he bent over his plate, the capable strength in his hands. He was not like Thomas, not like any of the men she had known back in Hartwell. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bluster or bravado. After breakfast, James showed her around the ranch, pointing out the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden that was looking a bit neglected, the cattle grazing in the pastures that stretched out toward the horizon. It was a modest operation, nothing like the massive Thornton spread, but Sarah could see that it was well maintained and loved. This was a man who took pride in his work, who cared about the land and the animals under his care. "I have got 2 men who work for me," James explained as they walked. Cal Henderson and Miguel Santos. They are good men, loyal, and they will not ask questions or spread gossip in town. They usually come by in the afternoon to help with the cattle and the heavy work. I will explain the situation to them, make sure they understand to keep quiet about you being here. Sarah nodded, wrapping the shawl more tightly around her shoulders even though the September morning was already warming up. "Do you go into Redemption often?" she asked. "Once a week usually, for supplies and to check the post office. It is a small town, maybe 300 people. Most folks keep to themselves, mind their own business. Why?" "I was just thinking about the wanted posters. If Garrett has sent them out, they will be in every town in Texas by now." Sarah bit her lip, worry creasing her forehead. "Someone might recognize me." James considered this. "Then I will be careful. And I will ask around, see if anyone has heard anything about the Thorntons or bounty hunters in the area. Best to know what we are dealing with before it shows up on our doorstep." They walked back toward the house, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite her worries. There was something peaceful about this place, something that soothed the raw edges of her fear. The sky was huge and blue overhead, unmarred by clouds, and the wind carried the scent of grass and cattle and open space. It was so different from the suffocating confines of the house she had shared with Thomas, where every room held memories of violence and despair. "Can I ask you something?" James said as they reached the porch. "Of course." "What do you want to do? I mean, long term." "Once the baby is born and things settle down. Have you thought about it?" Sarah sank down onto the porch steps, one hand automatically going to her belly. "I have not let myself think that far ahead," she admitted. "It seemed like tempting fate, like if I made plans they would just get snatched away. But if I could do anything," she paused, staring out at the horizon. "I would want to open another general store like my father had. I loved working there, talking to people, helping them find what they needed. And I would want to raise my child somewhere safe, somewhere they could grow up without fear." James sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Those seem like good dreams to me," he said quietly. "Worthy dreams. What about you?" Sarah asked, turning to look at him. "What are your dreams, James Holloway?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I want to build this ranch into something my father would be proud of. Expand the herd, maybe buy some of the neighboring land if it comes up for sale. Find a good woman to share it with, raise a family." He glanced at her, then away quickly as if embarrassed. "Simple dreams for a simple man." "Not simple," Sarah said softly. "Important. The things that really matter always are." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Sarah felt something shifting inside her, something that had been locked away tight for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. Hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life did not have to be defined by the violence and pain that had driven her here. That maybe there could be something good waiting on the other side of all this fear. The afternoon brought Cal and Miguel, just as James had promised. Cal was a lanky man in his early 30s with sun-bleached hair and a quick smile, while Miguel was shorter and stockier, with dark eyes that missed nothing. James took them aside and spoke to them in low tones, and Sarah watched from the kitchen window as both men glanced toward the house with expressions of understanding and sympathy. When they came in for the coffee and cornbread she had prepared, they were respectful and kind, treating her like a lady despite her circumstances. "Any man who would hurt a woman deserves what he gets," Cal said bluntly when James finished explaining the situation. "You did the right thing, ma'am. And you can count on us to keep our mouths shut and our eyes open." Miguel nodded agreement. "My sister, she had a husband who beat her. When she finally left him, our family helped her hide. I understand what you are facing, and I will not let harm come to you if I can prevent it." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes at their easy acceptance, their willingness to help without judgment. "Thank you," she managed. "Both of you, you do not know what it means." As the days passed, Sarah settled into a rhythm at the Broken Creek Ranch. She insisted on helping around the house despite James's protests, cooking meals and mending clothes and tidying the rooms that had clearly been neglected in his sister's absence. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something to the household that had taken her in. The physical work was tiring but satisfying, and it kept her mind occupied so she did not dwell too much on the danger that still lurked out there somewhere. James was gone most of the day working the ranch with Cal and Miguel, but he always came back to the house for lunch and again in the evening for supper. Sarah found herself looking forward to those times, to the conversations they would have over the table about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had been a hard man but a fair one, about his sister Emma who had always been smarter than both her brothers combined. She told him about her childhood in Hartwell, about her father who had taught her to read and to keep accounts, about the dreams she had once had before Thomas Thornton had come into her life and destroyed them. "You miss him at all?" James asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Your husband, I mean, even knowing what he did, were there good times too?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "At the very beginning, maybe. When we were courting, he could be charming. He brought me flowers and said pretty things and I thought I loved him. But looking back now, I wonder if I ever really knew him at all, or if I just loved the idea of being loved, of having someone choose me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "No. I do not miss him. I miss what I thought he was, what I hoped we could be. But the real Thomas, the man who hit me and called me names and made me afraid in my own home, I am glad he is gone." James reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady around hers. "You deserve better," he said quietly. "You deserve someone who will treat you with respect and kindness, who will cherish you the way you should be cherished." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. There was something in his eyes, something intense and tender that made her breath catch. "James," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she wanted something, needed something she could not quite name. He squeezed her hand gently, then let go and stood up, breaking the moment. "I should check on the horses before full dark," he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. "Make sure they have enough water." Sarah watched him walk away toward the barn, and she knew with sudden clarity that she was falling for him. It was too soon, too fast, too complicated given everything that had happened. But her heart did not care about any of that. Her heart only knew that James Holloway was good and kind and strong, that he had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, that he made her feel safe in a way she had never felt before. And that terrified her more than all the Thorntons in Texas. 3 weeks passed in relative peace. The leaves on the cottonwood trees near the creek began to turn gold, and the September heat gave way to the cooler breezes of early October. Sarah's belly grew rounder, the baby more active, and she found herself actually looking forward to the birth despite all the complications it would bring. James had mentioned that there was a midwife in Redemption, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who was known for her skill and discretion, and he had promised to bring her to the ranch when the time came. Sarah had just finished hanging the laundry out to dry one afternoon when she heard the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Her blood went cold, and she dropped the wet shirt she had been holding, one hand going instinctively to her belly. James was out on the range with Cal and Miguel, and she was alone at the house. She ran inside and peered out the window, her heart sinking when she saw 3 riders coming up the road. She did not recognize them from this distance, but something about the purposeful way they rode told her this was not a social call. She grabbed the rifle James kept by the door, checked that it was loaded, and positioned herself where she could see out but not be easily seen. The riders pulled up in the yard, and Sarah's worst fears were confirmed when she recognized Garrett Thornton's cruel face beneath his black hat. He looked around with cold calculation, taking in the neat ranch house and the barn and the corrals. The 2 men with him were strangers, hard-faced men with guns on their hips and the look of men who would do violence for money. "Hello, the house," Garrett called out. I am looking for James Holloway. I want to talk to him about some business." Sarah stayed frozen behind the window, the rifle heavy in her hands. She knew Garrett had not seen her yet, had no way of knowing she was inside. If she stayed quiet, maybe he would leave. Maybe he was just fishing, checking ranches in the area on the off chance someone had seen her. But then one of the hired guns said something too low for her to hear, and Garrett's eyes sharpened as he looked at the laundry flapping on the line. Sarah's heart sank as she realized her mistake. There were dresses hanging there, women's clothing where there should be none. And now Garrett was climbing down from his horse, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Seems like Holloway has got himself a woman," Garrett said loudly. "Now that is interesting, seeing as how I heard he lived alone out here." He started walking toward the house. "Ma'am, if you are in there, you might as well come out. I just want to ask you a few questions." Sarah raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at Garrett's chest. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she called out. "You stop right there, Garrett Thornton. You have got no business here and you are not welcome on this land." Garrett stopped, and a slow smile spread across his face. Well, Sarah Mae. I have been looking all over Texas for you, and here you are playing house with some cowboy I never even heard of." He took another step forward. "Put down that rifle, girl. You are coming back to Hartwell to face justice for what you did to Thomas." "Justice?" Sarah's voice cracked with anger. "There is no justice in Hartwell, not for the likes of me. You own the sheriff and the judge and half the jury. I killed Thomas because he was going to kill me and my baby. That is the truth, and no court you control is going to hear it." "Thomas was my brother," Garrett said, and now his voice was ice cold. "And you murdered him in his own home. You are going to hang for that, Sarah Mae, one way or another." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "I will shoot you if you come any closer. I have done it once and I will do it again." "That would be unwise." The voice came from behind Garrett, and Sarah's eyes darted past him to see James sitting on his horse at the edge of the yard. Cal and Miguel were flanking him, all three men armed and clearly ready for trouble. James's face was hard and cold, nothing like the gentle man she had come to know over the past weeks. Garrett spun around, his hand going to his gun, but James was faster. He had his rifle out and pointed at Garrett before the other man could clear leather. "I would not," James said quietly. "You are outnumbered and outgunned, Thornton. Best thing for you to do is get back on your horse and ride out of here while you still can." "This does not concern you, Holloway," Garrett snarled. "That woman killed my brother. She is a murderer and she is coming back to Hartwell with me." "She is under my protection," James said, and there was steel in his voice. "And she is not going anywhere. Now I have heard the stories about the Thorntons, about how you all think you run things down Hartwell way. But this is not Hartwell. This is my land and my rules apply here. Sarah stays." One of Garrett's hired guns shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his weapon. Miguel immediately trained his rifle on the man, and Cal did the same with the other gun hand. The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut with a knife. "You are making a big mistake," Garrett said, his eyes moving from James to Sarah and back again. "I will bring the law down on you for harboring a fugitive. I will have the marshal here inside a week." "Then he can come," James said calmly, "and I will tell him exactly what Sarah told me. That she killed her husband in self-defense after years of abuse, and that any reasonable person would understand why. Maybe the law in Hartwell is corrupt, but there are still honest lawmen in Texas, Thornton. And I am willing to bet the federal marshal will be a lot more interested in hearing about how you bought off the local sheriff than he will be in arresting a woman who defended herself." Garrett's face went purple with rage. "You do not know who you are dealing with." "I know exactly who I am dealing with," James said, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. "A bully who thinks his money and his name make him untouchable. Well, you are not untouchable out here, Thornton. You are just a man on a horse with two hired guns who are starting to realize they are not getting paid enough to die today." He raised his voice slightly. "Isn't that right, boys? The two gun hands exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the calculation in their eyes. They had been hired to chase down a pregnant woman, not to face off against three armed men who clearly knew how to use their weapons. One of them cleared his throat. "We did not sign on for a range war, Thornton." Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten, at least for now. He pointed a finger at James, his face twisted with fury. "This is not over. I will be back with the law, and then we will see how brave you are." "I will be here," James said. "Now get off my land." Garrett and his men wheeled their horses around and rode off at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air behind them. James did not lower his rifle until they were out of sight, and even then he kept watching the road for a long moment before finally dismounting. Sarah stumbled out onto the porch, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. James was there in an instant, catching her before she fell, his arms strong and steady around her. "I have got you," he murmured. "You are safe, I have got you." She clung to him, the rifle falling forgotten to the porch as she pressed her face against his chest and let the tears come. All the fear and tension of the past weeks poured out of her in great racking sobs, and James just held her, one hand stroking her hair while he murmured soothing nonsense into her ear. Cal and Miguel had dismounted and were standing a respectful distance away, their expressions grim. "He will be back," Cal said quietly, "and next time he will bring more men." "I know," James said, not letting go of Sarah. "We need to be ready. Miguel, can you ride into Redemption and talk to the marshal? Tell him the whole story before Thornton gets to him with his version." "Cal, I want you to go to the neighboring ranches, talk to Tom Sawyer and the Johnsons, see if they will help us if it comes to a fight." "You think it will come to that?" Cal asked. "I hope not, but I am not taking any chances." James finally loosened his hold on Sarah enough to look down at her face. "Come on, let's get you inside." He led her into the house and settled her in a chair, then poured her a glass of water and made her drink it. Sarah's hands were still shaking, but the tears had stopped. She looked up at him, this man who had put himself between her and danger without a moment's hesitation, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "You could have just given me up," she whispered. "You could have stayed out of it. Why did you not?" James crouched down in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Because I care about you," he said simply. "Because in the past 3 weeks you have become important to me, Sarah Mae, more important than I probably should admit. I am not going to let anyone hurt you, not Garrett Thornton or anyone else." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "James, I am pregnant with another man's child. I am a widow, a killer, a fugitive. I have got nothing to offer you but trouble." "You are a survivor," James corrected gently. "You are brave and strong and kind, and you did what you had to do to protect yourself and your baby. As for the rest," he reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "I do not care about any of that, I just care about you." "I care about you too," Sarah admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do. I care about you so much it scares me." James smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. "Then we will be scared together," he said. "And we will figure this out one day at a time." He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her and just holding her, and Sarah let herself relax into his embrace, let herself believe that maybe everything really would be all right. Miguel rode back from Redemption 2 days later with news that was both good and bad. The federal marshal was apparently out of town dealing with some trouble up north and would not be back for at least a week. But Miguel had spoken to the deputy marshal, a man named Jim Curtis, and had explained the situation. Curtis had listened carefully and promised to look into the matter, but he had also warned that if the Thorntons were as powerful as Sarah claimed, it would be difficult to go against them without solid proof of their corruption. "He wants to talk to you," Miguel told Sarah as they all sat around the kitchen table that evening. "He said if you are willing to give a statement about what Thomas did to you, about why you shot him, he will make sure it gets to the right people." Maybe even take it to the territorial governor if he has to. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Do you think he is trustworthy? I do, Miguel said firmly. I have known Jim Curtis for 5 years. He is a good man, an honest lawman. If anyone can help you, it is him. James looked at Sarah, his expression serious. It is your choice, but I think it might be worth talking to him. If we can get the law on our side, it will make things a lot easier. Sarah nodded slowly. Then let him come. I will tell him everything. Deputy Marshal Jim Curtis arrived at the Broken Creek Ranch 3 days later, a tall, lean man in his 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He sat at the kitchen table with Sarah and James and listened carefully as Sarah told her story, starting from the moment she met Thomas Thornton to the night she killed him. She left nothing out, not the beatings or the cruelty or the fear that had been her constant companion for 2 years. Curtis took notes and asked clarifying questions, his face growing darker as Sarah spoke. When she finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. Ma'am, I want you to know that I believe you, and I want you to know that what you described is not murder, it is self-defense. No jury in the country would convict you if they heard the whole truth. But the Thorntons will never let the truth be heard, Sarah said bitterly. They own Hartwell, they own the people in it. They might own Hartwell, Curtis agreed. But they do not own me, and they do not own the territorial government. I am going to take your statement to the judge in redemption and file it with the territorial court. I am also going to start asking questions about the Thorntons, about their business dealings and their relationship with the local law. If they are as corrupt as you say, there will be evidence and I will find it. What happens to Sarah in the meantime? James asked. Curtis looked between them and something softened in his expression. She stays here under your protection. I cannot officially sanction it, but unofficially, I think she is in the safest place she could be right now. He stood and put his hat back on. I will be in touch. And if the Thorntons come around again, you send word to me immediately. They do not have the authority to arrest her or remove her from your property, and if they try, they will answer to me. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than nothing. Sarah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders as Curtis rode away. At least now there was someone in authority who knew the truth, who believed her, who might be able to help. October turned to November and the weather grew cooler. Sarah's belly grew larger and the baby's movements became more pronounced. James had taken to placing his hand on her stomach in the evenings, marveling at the kicks and rolls of the child inside. The first time he did it, he had asked permission. His cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and Sarah had taken his hand and placed it over her belly without hesitation. The look of wonder on his face had made her fall even deeper in love with him, because she was in love with him. She could not deny it anymore, could not pretend that what she felt was just gratitude or friendship or the result of proximity. She loved James Holloway with a depth and intensity that took her breath away. She loved the way he talked to the horses, gentle and patient. She loved the way he made her laugh with his dry observations about life on the ranch. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and valuable, like she mattered, but she had not told him. How could she? She was still married to Thomas in the eyes of the law, even if he was dead. Her situation was complicated at best, dangerous at worst. And there was the baby to think about. Thomas's child who would be born in a few weeks and who would tie her to the Thorntons forever whether she wanted it or not. One evening in mid-November, as they sat by the fire after supper, James finally brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to know that there is no pressure, no expectation. But I need to say it because if I do not, I am going to burst." Sarah set down the socks she had been mending and gave him her full attention, her heart hammering. "All right." James took a deep breath, then got down on one knee in front of her chair. Sarah's eyes widened, and she pressed one hand to her mouth. "I know this is not the most romantic situation," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I know you are still dealing with the aftermath of Thomas, and I know you are about to have a baby, and I know that there are people out there who want to hurt you. But I also know that I love you, Sarah Mae. I have loved you since the first time I saw you in that barn, scared and alone and still fighting. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life taking care of you and that baby. I want to give you the home and the safety you deserve. I want to be the man you wake up next to every morning for the next 50 years. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, and James reached up to wipe them away with his thumb. What I am trying to say is, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your child? Let me give you both my name and my protection. Will you build a life with me here on this ranch? Yes, Sarah whispered, and then louder, yes, yes, yes. She slid off the chair and into his arms, and he held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. I love you, she said fiercely. I love you so much, James. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, did not think I deserved to be happy, but you make me happy. You make me feel safe and valued and cherished, and I want nothing more than to be your wife. James pulled back enough to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. We will do it right, he promised. As soon as the situation with the Thorntons is resolved, as soon as it is safe, we will get married proper in town with witnesses and everything. But for now, for tonight, I just need you to know that you are mine and I am yours, and nothing is going to change that. Nothing, Sarah agreed, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and gentle against hers. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been, nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had endured. This was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Sarah felt like she was coming home after a long journey through darkness. They sat together by the fire for hours, talking about the future, making plans. James wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy some horses to breed and sell. Sarah talked about her dream of opening a general store, and James said there was no reason she could not do it right in redemption once things settled down. They talked about the baby, about names and what they would need to prepare. James had already started building a cradle in the barn, he admitted shyly, wanting to have it ready when the time came. What if the baby looks like Thomas? Sarah asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been haunting her for months. What if every time you look at this child you see him? James took her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. Then I will see a child who is half you, he said firmly. A child who deserves to be loved and protected regardless of who their father was. Sarah, I meant what I said. I want to be this baby's father in every way that matters. Blood does not make a family, love does. Commitment does. And I am committed to both of you for the rest of my life. Sarah believed him. For the first time in years, she let herself hope that the future could be something bright and beautiful instead of dark and frightening. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of a cold December morning, Sarah went into labor. James woke to the sound of her gasping his name, and he was out of bed in an instant, lighting lamps and helping her breathe through the contractions that were already coming hard and fast. Cal rode into town at a gallop to fetch Mrs. Patterson, the midwife, while James stayed by Sarah's side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Mrs. Patterson arrived within an hour, a competent, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who took one look at Sarah and announced that the baby would be born before noon. She shooed James out of the bedroom, but Sarah cried out for him, and Mrs. Patterson relented with a knowing look. "All right then," she said. "But you do what I tell you and stay out of the way." The next few hours were the longest of James's life. He had seen cattle give birth dozens of times, had helped pull calves and foals when they were breech or stuck, but nothing had prepared him for watching Sarah in pain. She was so strong, so brave, gritting her teeth through contractions that made her whole body shake, never crying out except when the pain was at its worst. James held her hand and let her squeeze until his bones ached, murmuring encouragement and love and promises that everything would be all right. Finally, as the winter sun climbed toward its zenith, Mrs. Patterson announced that it was time to push. Sarah bore down with everything she had, her face red and streaked with sweat, and James supported her back and told her how amazing she was, how proud he was of her. And then, after 3 final pushes that seemed to take everything Sarah had left, the baby slid into Mrs. Patterson's waiting hands. The cry was immediate and lusty, and Mrs. Patterson laughed as she wrapped the baby in a clean blanket. "You have got yourself a boy," she announced, placing the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "And he is healthy as a horse, listen to those lungs." Sarah stared down at the baby in awe, tears streaming down her face. The infant had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and his eyes were squeezed shut as he wailed his displeasure at being born. "Hello," Sarah whispered, touching one finger to his tiny hand. He immediately gripped it, his crying quieting, and Sarah let out a sob of joy. "Hello, little one. I am your mama." James looked at the baby and felt his heart expand in his chest. There was nothing of Thomas in that face, at least not that he could see. All he saw was Sarah's nose, Sarah's chin, Sarah's determination in the set of that tiny mouth. This was Sarah's son, and James loved him already with a fierceness that surprised him. "Can I hold him?" he asked quietly, and Sarah smiled and carefully transferred the baby to his arms. James cradled the infant against his chest, marveling at how small and perfect he was at the weight of him, the reality of him. "Hey there," he murmured. "I am James. I am going to take care of you and your mama, I promise." The baby opened his eyes, unfocused and dark, and seemed to look right at James. Then he yawned hugely and settled against James's chest as if he had found exactly where he belonged. Mrs. Patterson bustled around the room, cleaning up and helping Sarah deliver the afterbirth, checking to make sure everything was as it should be. When she was satisfied, she washed her hands and gave them both a warm smile. "You did beautifully," she told Sarah. "Rest now and let that man of yours take care of you for a while. The baby is perfect, and you are going to be just fine." After she left, James laid the baby in the cradle he had built and helped Sarah get cleaned up and into a fresh nightgown. She was exhausted, her face pale and her body shaking with fatigue, but her eyes were bright with happiness. James tucked her into bed and brought the cradle close so she could see the baby, then climbed in beside her and gathered her carefully into his arms. "You were incredible," he said, kissing her forehead, "the bravest thing I have ever seen." "We did it," Sarah said, her voice slurred with exhaustion. "We have a son." "What do you want to call him?" James asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to name him after my father." Daniel James, if that is all right with you." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That is perfect," he said. "Daniel James Holloway." "We are not married yet," Sarah pointed out sleepily. "He is technically Daniel James Thornton by law, not for long," James said firmly. "As soon as you are healed up and strong again, we are getting married. And then we are going to the courthouse and filing the papers to make me his legal father. The Thorntons gave up any claim to him when they tried to hurt you. He is ours, Sarah. Ours." Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, and within moments she was asleep. James held her and listened to the soft breathing of the baby in the cradle and felt more content than he had ever been in his life. This was what mattered. This family they were building, this love they shared. Everything else would work itself out. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the particular exhaustion that comes with caring for a newborn. Daniel was a good baby, relatively speaking, but he still needed constant attention. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning day by day, and James threw himself into helping however he could. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Daniel in the middle of the night and learned how to heat bottles of milk when Sarah was too tired to nurse. Cal and Miguel were both utterly besotted with the baby, showing up with carved wooden toys and offering to take shifts watching him so James and Sarah could get some rest. It felt like they were building something real and solid, a family and a community that extended beyond just blood. Deputy Marshal Curtis visited in early January with news. He had filed Sarah's statement with the territorial court and had started investigating the Thorntons. What he had found was damning. Sheriff Brown of Hartwell had taken money from the Thorntons on multiple occasions to look the other way on various illegal activities, and Curtis had sworn statements from 3 different people who were willing to testify to the corruption. The territorial judge had issued a warrant for Brown's arrest, and the governor's office was taking an interest in the case. "What about Garrett?" Sarah asked, holding Daniel against her shoulder. "What about the charges against me?" "The territorial prosecutor reviewed your statement and the evidence," Curtis said. "They have declined to press charges. The ruling is self-defense, clear and simple. You are a free woman, Sarah. The Thorntons have no legal claim on you or your child." Sarah closed her eyes and let the relief wash over her. Free, she was free, the nightmare was finally over. "There is one more thing," Curtis said carefully. "Garrett Thornton left Texas last week. Seems like he got wind of the investigation and decided it was better to disappear than face questions about his involvement in his brother's business dealings. Last anyone heard, he was heading to California." "So he is just gone?" James asked. "He is not going to come back and cause more trouble?" "I cannot make any guarantees," Curtis admitted. "But with the legal system watching the Thorntons now and with you cleared of all charges, I do not think he has much incentive to come back. He would be walking into a hornet's nest." He smiled at Sarah. "I think you can finally breathe easy, ma'am. You and your family are safe." After Curtis left, Sarah sat on the porch despite the cold January air, holding Daniel close and just breathing. James came out and wrapped a blanket around both of them, then sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "It is really over," she whispered. "I can barely believe it." "It is over," James confirmed. "Now we get to start the rest of our lives." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Redemption, with Cal and Miguel and Mrs. Patterson as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter to fit, and James wore his best suit and a nervous smile. The pastor, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson, kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Sarah like he never wanted to let her go. The townspeople threw them a small celebration afterward, bringing food and gifts and offering their congratulations. Sarah was overwhelmed by the kindness and acceptance, by the way these strangers had welcomed her into their community without judgment. This was so different from Hartwell, so different from the stifling gossip and the constant fear. This was what it felt like to be part of something good. They went home that evening as husband and wife, with Daniel sleeping peacefully in his cradle in the back of the wagon. James carried Sarah over the threshold of their home, making her laugh and protest that he would hurt himself, and then they stood together in the middle of the kitchen and just held each other. "I love you," Sarah said, looking up at her husband with her whole heart in her eyes. "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," James said, cupping her face in his hands, "and I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how much." They made love that night for the first time, slow and gentle and full of tenderness. Sarah had been nervous, the memories of Thomas still lingering in the back of her mind, but James was patient and careful, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. And when it was over, she lay in his arms and felt whole in a way she had never felt before. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under James's careful management, and Sarah eventually did open her general store in Redemption, a cheerful place that became the heart of the community. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and loved the ranch with a passion that made James's heart swell with pride. Sarah and James told him the truth about his birth father when he was old enough to understand, but Daniel never questioned who his real father was. That was James, the man who had raised him and loved him and taught him how to be a good man, 3 years after they were married, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma after James's sister. 2 years after that came another son they called William. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the particular chaos that comes with raising children, and Sarah loved every moment of it. This was the life she had dreamed of back when she was hiding in that barn, terrified and alone. This was the home she had always wanted. James expanded the ranch just as he had planned, buying up neighboring land as it came available and building up a reputation for quality cattle and horses. He and Sarah worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building something that would last for generations. On their 10th anniversary, James took Sarah up to a hill that overlooked the ranch, the same hill where he had first told her he loved her. They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, and James pulled her close against his side. "You remember that first night?" He asked quietly. "When I found you in the barn." "I remember being more scared than I had ever been in my life," Sarah said, "and then you said those words, 'This is your home now,' and I thought you were crazy taking in a stranger like that." "Best decision I ever made," James said, kissing the top of her head. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, Sarah, a family, a purpose, a reason to get up every morning. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Sarah said, turning in his arms to look up at him. "You saved my life that night, James Holloway. But more than that, you showed me what love is supposed to look like. You showed me that I deserved kindness and respect and happiness. You gave me a home, not just a place to live, but a real home with love and laughter and safety. You gave me everything." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful together. Below them, the lights of the ranch house were beginning to come on, and they could see their children playing in the yard under Cal's watchful eye. This was their legacy, their future, their happily ever after. And it all started with a cowboy who found a pregnant woman hiding in his barn and decided to do the right thing, no matter what it cost him. Sarah lived to see her grandchildren grow up on that ranch, to see Daniel take over the management from his father and run it with the same care and dedication James had shown. She saw Emma become a teacher in redemption, educating the next generation of children. She saw William become a rancher like his father, buying his own spread on the other side of town and raising cattle with his wife and children. James and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies growing weaker, but their love never fading. They sat on that same porch where he had first held her hand and told her she deserved better. And they watched the seasons change, and the years pass and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. When James finally passed away at the age of 73, surrounded by his family in the house he had built with his own hands, his last words were to Sarah. "Still the best decision I ever made," he whispered, and she held his hand and cried and told him she would see him again someday. Sarah lived for 5 more years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried the legacy of the love she and James had built. She told them stories about the old days, about the Wild West and the struggles they had faced, about how sometimes the right person comes into your life at exactly the right moment and changes everything. And on a warm September evening, sitting on the porch of the home she had shared with James for 50 years, Sarah closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully in her sleep. Her last thought was of a barn on a September night, of a cowboy with gray eyes and a kind heart who had looked at her and said the words that changed her life forever. "This is your home now," and it had been. For 50 beautiful years, it had been home in every sense of the word. A place of love and safety and family, built on the foundation of one man's compassion and one woman's courage. Their children laid them to rest side by side on that hill overlooking the ranch, and for generations afterward the Holloway family told the story of how it all began. With a woman hiding in a barn, a cowboy who refused to turn away, and a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what can be built when people choose kindness over cruelty, love over fear, and compassion over indifference. The Holloway name is still respected throughout that part of Texas, and the descendants of Sarah and James still gather there every year to celebrate the family reunion and remember the two people who started it all. Daniel, that baby born in the middle of winter to a woman fleeing from violence, lived to be 87 years old. He never forgot that James Holloway was not his biological father, but he never considered him anything less than his real father either. James had chosen him, chosen to love him and raise him and give him a name and a home. That was what mattered. That was what defined family. Emma grew up to be as kind and compassionate as her mother, dedicating her life to helping others through education and community service. She married a good man who reminded her of her father, and together they raised 6 children who all went on to make their own marks on the world. William inherited his father's way with horses, and his mother's head for business. He built his ranch into one of the most successful in the county, and his children continued that legacy into the modern age. But none of them ever forgot the story of how their grandparents met, how a desperate woman hiding in a barn found safety and love with a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the person underneath. It became the foundation story of the family, the reminder that in the darkest times there are still good people who will step up and help, still kindness to be found in unexpected places, still hope even when everything seems hopeless. The barn where James first found Sarah was eventually torn down and rebuilt, but a plaque marks the spot now with a simple inscription. "This is your home now where it all began, September 1883. Visitors to the ranch often stop there and read the words, and the current generation of Holloways are always happy to tell the full story, to share the legacy of Sarah and James with anyone who wants to hear it, because some love stories are worth remembering. Some acts of compassion ripple forward through time, affecting generations that come after. And some moments of choice, like a cowboy deciding to help a stranger in need rather than turn her away, can change the course of countless lives. Sarah Mae Thornton Holloway's grave sits on that hill overlooking the ranch next to James's, and the inscription reads simply, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she found home here." Visitors often leave flowers, especially pregnant women who have heard the story and find inspiration in Sarah's courage and resilience. James's headstone is equally simple. A good man who did the right thing. It was what Sarah had insisted on when they commissioned the stones years before their deaths, and it was perfect. That was who James had been at his core, a man who did the right thing because it was right, not because it was easy or convenient or profitable. The legacy they left was not just the ranch or the family or the success. It was the example they set, the way they lived their lives with integrity and compassion. It was the love they showed each other and their children, the home they built that was safe and warm and full of laughter. It was the proof that the past does not define you, that who you become is more important than where you came from, that love really can conquer all if you are brave enough to choose it. And it all came back to that moment in September 1883, when a cowboy found a pregnant woman hiding in his barn, and instead of turning her away or demanding explanations or judging her circumstances, he simply said 5 words that would echo through more than a century of family history. "This is your home now," 5 words that meant safety, that meant acceptance. That meant love, 5 words that changed everything, the end.